All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to Filing with ForeFlight in Canada. This is a webinar we're doing to demonstrate how you can file different kinds of flight plans in Canada, whether those are VFR, IFR, cross-border in either direction, and just the steps you need to take within ForeFlight to prepare those flight plans, get them filed, and some basic information on aircraft setup. So before I turn it over to Dominik, our host today, I just want to provide you with some basic information about the GoToWebinar platform that we're using. You can ask questions by expanding the question panel on the right. It looks like a question mark inside a speech bubble. And you can just submit questions using the field at the bottom, and our staff will be responding to those questions by text during the webinar as much as we can. We will also pick out a few of the best questions to answer live during Q&A at the very end so that everyone can hear them. If you're having any audio problems, we strongly recommend that you join from a computer, not from a mobile device. We often see people on mobile devices like iPhones and iPads having more audio issues, whereas people using computers typically don't have any problems. So we strongly recommend you join from a computer. And lastly, this session is being recorded and it'll be accessible for later viewing at foreflight.com/onfrequency. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dominik.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, everyone. My name is Dominik. I am part of ForeFlight's Pilot Support Team here in Canada, and I'm a Canadian pilot myself. Today, I am excited to talk to you about the many filing capabilities that ForeFlight has to offer for Canadian pilots. Particularly now that we're slowly heading into the flying season. Here's today's topics. So, one of the most important things to have a seamless filing experience in ForeFlight is to have your aircraft set up properly. So we're going to take quite a bit of time to make sure that all the aircraft profiles you have in your particular ForeFlight mobile are set up properly with the proper ICAO codes so that you won't have any flight plan rejections and it'll be a seamless experience from top to bottom. We'll then get into specifically VFR filing capabilities, IFR filing, what some might consider some lesser known filing types, the Y and Z type, where you transition from an IFR flight plan to a VFR flight plan or vice versa. We'll then take a look at some cross-border flying, the US Canada and the other way as well. And we'll end the session with some questions and answers. We hope to answer as many of those as we possibly can. Now, before we continue, some great guides that ForeFlight has available to pilots is the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile, and a lot of what we're going to cover is included in there. There's another guide that specifically focuses on filing a ICAO within ForeFlight Mobile, and there's also a quick reference guide, ICAO filing with ForeFlight. And this one's really great for those PBN codes and other GPS-related codes that you may not be too familiar with, but they have a great description in this document for those. All those guides can be found in the documents section in ForeFlight Mobile, specifically in the drives, where you can see there on the left-hand side, the ForeFlight drive holds all the applicable guides that ForeFlight publishes and are available to you. You can also visit our website and support page, and they will be available to you there too. So let's take a look at aircraft setup. The aircraft setup itself can be done through the aircraft tab on the bottom menu there. And you see that I'll bring up all your aircraft listed on the left-hand side that you have created, the most recent being at the very top. Today we're going to take a look at a basic 172 profile. And you'll see that I've highlighted there the registration, the tail number itself, Charlie Golf Delta Quebec. It's very important not to put any dashes there, as that will come back as a rejection from ATC. A lot of the flight operations side of things here at ForeFlight, we see a lot of rejections because and errors because there's been a dash put in there. So just make sure to leave that dash out. You can put in some other information there as well. This is really want to know information, not need to know. Things like serial number. You want to make sure your aircraft type is correct, the category and the color. Home airport is not required, but it's nice to have in there as well. If you have a ForeFlight Performance Plus subscription, you'll have a list of performance profiles generated by ForeFlight there to choose from. If not, you can create your own profiles to have the most accurate flight planning data. And if we scroll down a little further, you have your glide performance. Great if you're using a lot of, or you're using ForeFlight in mountainous regions, where you can use that glide advisor to let you know if you're safe from terrain and where you can glide to in the worst case scenario. And going down a little further, this is the area that we'll focus in today, the filing section. Now, since we're not filing FAA domestic flight plans, we're going to skip over the FAA equipment and hop right into the ICAO equipment section, as all VFR and IFR flight plans in Canada are ICAO flight plans. So this is a list of all the ICAO, or the most common ICAO equipment codes, and the first you'll see there is a standard, or S, which stands for standard, and almost all aircraft will select this. It does include a VOR, an ILS, and VHF comms. Instead of selecting those individually, S is just the standard that you would select there. G, that's if you have a GPS, which most aircraft do these days. DME for D. Foxtrot there if you have an ADF. I if you have a inertial navigation system. B if you have WAS capable aircraft, if you have a WAS capable aircraft with LPV capabilities. And if you select R, that's basically telling the filing system that you are going to also select PBN codes. If you select R without selecting PBN codes, it will come back as an error. On top of that, ATC also requires a transponder code to be included in the ICAO surveillance field, so for the flight plan to be accepted. So here are the most common ones that are listed. Alpha for mode alpha, the no altitude encryptions. Charlie, probably the most common one, mode C transponders, which includes both mode A and C. Mode S, E, and L. When you get into the Echo and Lima categories, you're talking about extended squitters. Most ADS-B out transponders are this code, and Lima as well. What's nice is that if you're renting an aircraft, a lot of this information is included on the rental school's website. This is just an example. You can find their equipment type there, and you see that they're listed as Sierra Golf / Charlie. It's just a nice little handy tip to go on, do some research if you are renting aircraft. If you're not quite sure what equipment you have in your aircraft, you can always consult your manufacturer or your local avionics shop as well. So translating that into ForeFlight, we'll go ahead and tap the ICAO equipment tab there, and we'll get a list of available codes. Our aircraft today is just a basic 172 with a older GPS. So we're going to scroll down and hit G. It does have ILS and VOR capabilities. However, since we also have the VHF radio, we're going to tap S, giving us Golf and Sierra equipment codes. As for the ICAO surveillance, we have a standard modes A and C transponder. In this case, selecting Charlie would cover those both. Now, we'll get into this a little bit later, but if you do have ADS-B out or out and in capabilities, this is where you would also select that. So ADS-B becoming the newer ICAO surveillance capabilities around the world. More and more aircraft are equipped for this. So this is where you would make that selection. You could also scroll down and select your Mode S if you have that, or any other type of surveillance you have equipped in your aircraft. Next, we would move on to the ICAO weight category. Pretty straightforward. Most general aviation aircraft will be in the light category. If you're flying something heavier, then you might venture into the medium. And until you get into the airliner world or something super heavy, you're looking at the heavy category. Below that, you see ICAO PBN and other information sections. And I think the best way to demonstrate this would be take a look at some examples. So here's an example of our aircraft, Charlie Golf Delta Echo Quebec, without ADS-B out and just has a basic KLN 94 non-WAS GPS. What that would look like translating into an ICAO equipment and surveillance and PBN code system would be simply GS, mode C transponder, and since we're not specifying that that LPV or PBN approved PBN approved GPS, then we wouldn't put anything in the PBN category. But if we upgraded our GPS with something like a GNS 430, still not WAS GPS, but it is a PBN approved GPS. So in the ICAO equipment section, we could put Golf Romeo Sierra. Surveillance doesn't change. And now in the ICAO PBN section, we can actually put that our aircraft is Bravo 2, Charlie 2, and Delta 2. And just looking at that, that's an RNAV 5 GNSS system, an RNAV 2 GNSS system, and an RNAV 1 GNSS system. And that allows you to fly certain airways or certain GPS routes and certain approaches. Going a little further from that, Delta Quebec now upgrades their 430 to a WAS capable GPS. And that WAS capability now translates to us being able to fly LPV approaches. So we would add that Bravo, Golf, Romeo, Sierra into the equipment category. Surveillance would remain the same, and the PBN codes would also remain the same. Finally, Delta Quebec decides to add a Garmin GTX 345, and it includes ADS-B out and in. This is where we would specify that ADS-B out and in capability in the ICAO surveillance section there. So we'd add the Bravo 2, which is out and in, and under other information, just to make the filing even smoother, we could specify both code and SIR. Now, we'll get into what code and SIR actually mean, but if you have any questions regarding PBN codes or just ICAO equipment codes themselves, we really have a great webinar called ForeFlight on Frequency, ICAO Filing Made Easy. It is a fantastic deep dive into ICAO filing, and it's put on by our flight operations team. And if you want to just venture and learn more about that after this webinar, that's where it's available under our support videos. So we're talking about that code and SIR and what they mean. So in addition to the surveillance code, specifying all the ADS-B out capabilities, the two fields found in other should also be specified just to obtain the best ADS-B out equipage for ATC. But even though they're there, neither of them are actually mandated. And I would recommend this to Canadian pilots that specifically fly or are planning to fly in the United States for a number of reasons. So if your ADS-B equipped aircraft is a 1090 megahertz out only, you're going to specify the Bravo 1 category. However, if it's out and in 1090 megahertz, you're going to specify Bravo 2. Now, some of the older ADS-B systems are actually 978 megahertz, the UAT systems, and they can also come in out and in. So in that case, you would specify either Uniform 1 or Uniform 2. As an example, if your aircraft is equipped with an ADS-B out only 1090, then you'd only choose Bravo 1. But if it has out and in and 978, you'd choose Bravo 2 and Uniform 2. Okay. An important note here is that an iPad and an ADS-B portable receiver do not count as an ADS-B and equipped aircraft. The code and SIR values under other information. A code is an assigned hexadecimal value found in the Transport Canada registry, and it's uniquely associated with your registration. And it's broadcast out always by the ADS-B out systems. So by including it, NavCanada actually associates your flight plan and your ADS-B out optimization. What this translates to is reduced transponder reassignments when you're flying near other aircraft, especially if they have the same transponder code or similar code. So it can make flying a little smoother and transitioning from different FIRs and different centers to be a little smoother. Now, where do you find your hexadecimal value for your aircraft? Well, you take a venture out to the Canadian Civil Aviation Registry website, and it's a very simple, easy website to use. You type in your registration. If your aircraft is registered, you'll see all the information pop up, and under the 24-bit address information there, if you look all the way right, you notice that hexadecimal value there. So that is the hexadecimal value code for your aircraft registration. Where do we put that in ForeFlight? Well, under other information and under code, that's where I would input that hexadecimal value. And that'll be transmitted in your flight plan. SIR. So SIR is used to indicate what the ADS-B out variety is that is 2020 compliant in the United States. And this allows you to be routed into airspace or along routes that only ADS-B out aircraft are permitted. And so if there's a radar outage, you might still get direct routing in that area, even though some other aircraft might not be assigned that routing. It's pretty straightforward. There are essentially two values used for this, and they're 260B for 1090 ES systems and 282 Bravo for UAT systems. You can always take a look at that website there, some FAA flight plan guidance. They have a great article there about what ADS-B out compliant systems and their specifications are. But in reality, this is all you need to know. ADS-B out transponders 1090 ES, you're going to specify 260 Bravo. ADS-B out UAT, the 978 megahertz systems, 282 Bravo. Where does this go? Again, under the other information, scroll down to SIR, and we're going to input 260 Bravo because we have a 1090 ES system here. So after filling out all that necessary information under the filing section, we can scroll down all the way to the bottom where you'll find a Nav Canada section. This is specifically for Canadian airplanes, as it's required by Nav Canada, and specifying your undercarriage and ELT type. Now, even if you don't fill it out here, you will have another chance to do it when you review your ICAO flight plan form in the flights page. But if you put it in here, then it'll be auto-filled into the filing flight plan form. And it's located just at the bottom of your aircraft equipment list. All right, so let's start talking about VFR filing in Canada. In this example, we are going from Brampton to Muskoka with maybe a touch and go in Collingwood. But basically, this is the route we're going to take. We're going to go up to Inglewood, up to Orangeville, Collingwood, and then our final destination of Muskoka. Now, once I'm happy with that route, I can tap the pack button and make sure I'm packed for my weather, fuel prices, and NOTAMs for the route of flight. All the charts have already been downloaded. That's a quick and easy way to make sure that you have everything downloaded for offline use. Taking another look at my routes, my navlog this time. You'll get your headings and totals and your leg totals. And just taking a deeper look at the route, make sure I'm satisfied and happy with it. So I'm going from Brampton. I'm taking pretty much following that VFR corridor there from Inglewood to Orangeville. Those are custom waypoints that I've named Orangeville and Inglewood. Heading up to Collingwood, and finally my final destination of Muskoka. I also want to make sure by going back to the flight plan and edit page that I've selected a proper estimated time of departure, 6 p.m. And when I'm satisfied with that, I can tap the send to button and send it over to my flights page, where we'll be continuing with our detailed navlog, briefing, and eventually filing. Now, taking a further look for the navlog and briefing functions for our flight. If we tap on navlog, we see that we get a pretty detailed navlog for our flight. This is a performance-only navlog, the detailed navlog. If you have a Basic Plus plan, you will still get a navlog for your flight. It'll include a little less detail than what we see here. But taking a look here, we see that we've got our basic flight description at the top, our routing, waypoint information, winds aloft, summaries for our fuel and times, as well as some quick airport information for reference, like airport diagrams and frequencies. Now, the navlog itself can be printed or copied or shared or sent to someone just by hitting the send to icon in the top right-hand corner. You can also change the type of template the navlog is in. So that was standard, and this is an international template. What you'll notice right off the bat is that in an international template, there's a little more room to write down things like ATISes and clearances, as well as remarks at each of the waypoints. You can write down your arrival ATIS right on there. So if you have this printed off, it's a nice, easy way to write directly on a sheet of paper if you wanted to. And you get the same type of airport diagrams as well. You'll notice one extra thing that we include here is the ICAO flight plan, which is the actual filing coding that is going to be sent to air traffic control, your type of aircraft, and other information there. Going back to standard, if you're just doing a day VFR flight, the standard flight navlog will do just fine. Moving on to briefing. So a briefing is generated when you tap that briefing tab there. These types of briefings include vertical cross sections. So you'll get your turbulence and icing severities based on different altitudes. Your wind temperature and turbulence charts, again based on your altitudes. Any significant weather, your METARS TAFs for your airports and en route airports, any SIGMETs or AirMets, and the NOTAMs for both departure destination and en route. Again, this can be printed, sent, or saved, depending on your preference. Now, once we're satisfied with our navlog and briefings, we can work our way down the flights tab. The next you'll see is your departure and destination. You want to make sure that's all correct. Performance Plus subscribers will also see a takeoff and landing tabs there. And once you tap on those, you actually get takeoff and landing performance data based off of your aircraft performance database. So you get a lot of great information here, quick reference, the types of runways available to you at your departure, all the information regarding those runways, whether they're asphalt or turf, the slope, usable lengths. Your weather information is also included here, wind direction, speed, and temperature. You can input an altimeter setting, and it actually tells you where it's getting that altimeter setting from. In this case, the closest weather station is Toronto. It was 46 minutes ago. We also can take a look at aircraft configuration, so takeoff weight and safety distance factors if you want to factor those in. As well as your performance, so liftoff speeds, ground rolls, what your expected 50-foot distance will be, and climb speeds will be. If you tap back to the flights page, the departure itself, again, the info tab will give you a really quick view on your airport information. If we hit our destination field, well, we can take a look at our destination runways and the latest weather there, and you'll see that runway 0927 there is closed, so we know we're not going to use those. The preferential runway for today will be 36. And again, aircraft configuration, your landing weights, you can factor in a safety distance there as well, and it's a great little reference for your total ground rolls and distances and landing performance based on your aircraft profile. Now, working our way down the flights page, we'll take a look at the aircraft we have selected, make sure it's the right one and the right codes. Your ForeFlight performance profiles, if available, they'll be listed under there, and you can adjust them as necessary. If we don't want to go max RPM today, we can adjust that to 2100. Or if you have your own custom built profiles there as well. Scrolling down to routes, verify that we are in fact filing under VFR flight rules. Your route and cruise altitudes will be displayed there. Now, the route advisor in our VFR flight plan case doesn't really apply, but if we were filing IFR, that would be a great tool. What we will take a look at is the altitude advisor. Tapping on your altitude there, we've selected 5,500 feet, but we can take a look at both VFR easterly and westerly altitudes, and we get an average headwind and fuel burn there, as well as time en route. Our payloads, today we're just going to go one person, but we're going to increase the cargo load to 70. And it's just myself going up with 70 pounds of cargo. Our fuel loads, here our fuel policy can be specified. So I am currently under a manual fuel policy, which means it's a user-defined fuel amount at engine start. I know how much fuel I have at engine start, and I'm just going to go with that. And what the fuel section here under the flights page does is just give you a rough outline of your flight fuel and fuel at landing. So it'll give you things like taxi fuel, fuel at destination, and adjustable fuel at landing. So if you want to land with a certain amount of fuel, we can select it there and have a reserve amount of fuel as well. Same thing with the weights. Now, it's important to note here that this weight section is not tied in directly with the weight and balance page. What this is really meant to do is just give you an outline of what your expected weights are based on the fuel information and the weight information you entered above. So taking a look at this, we see that our ramp weight is 2150, and how much pounds we still have available, or useful load we still have available for us, and our takeoff weights and landing weights based on our fuel burns. If we continue down past the weight section, we can see that there's destination services. So I'm familiar with Muskoka. I know that they don't have an FBO there, but the Muskoka Airport takes care of the fuel. And we can take a little look at more information as far as what phone numbers are available, what services are available, if there's any fees, and any comments that other ForeFlight users have left previously. It's a great way to reference a quick reference of hours of operation, and if you want to call, you can call as well. The flight log at the bottom there, that is just for reference. If you want to log your fuel at shutdown and the times of your flight, that's available there, and that will be saved under your flight on the flights tab. We have an indication there that we are packed for the flight, and if I'm happy with all that information on that flight page, that's when we're going to go down to the very bottom right-hand corner where it says Proceed to File. So when we tap Proceed to File, we are going to come up with our flight plan form. Now, since I've made changes on my flights page, such as the amount of cargo and my fuel capacity, the flight plan has recognized that I've made changes there, and it's asking me now to sync those changes, or if I want to disregard those changes. But since I do plan on taking 70 pounds of cargo and more fuel, I'm going to copy those changes into the flight plan form, and that's going to increase or change my flight plan a little bit. So we're going to select copy. We're going to select copy, and my endurance will change in my flight plan form. And what you see here is very similar to what you see in a paper flight plan form, just laid out a bit differently. So we want to make sure we're filling out the right form type, the ICAO flight plan form under the VFR flight rules. The type of flight is general aviation. The aircraft we've selected is all right. The call sign is optional, but if you want to put a call sign, that's where you'd put it. Our departure airport and the time and date of departure, persons on board, en route, or routing, I should say. You notice that it changed those Inglewood and Orangeville waypoints, those user waypoints that I inputted into actual lat longs, because that's how ATC is going to see it. Our cruise altitudes and time en route, fuel aboard, and a remarks section. Now, this is something very important for VFR pilots in Canada, our destination airport and our contact and phone information for search and rescue. So these are mandatory fields for VFR filers in Canada. In the event search and rescue is initiated, NavCanada requires that there's a person to be contacted, Brantford Flight Center in this case, since I'm renting this airplane, and that's their phone number. So in the event of search and rescue initiation, these are the contact numbers that CFB Trenton's going to use in this case, or other search and rescue capabilities. So those are mandatory fields. Scrolling down, we have our dinghy and emergency information. So if you have any life jackets on board or dinghy accounts, you can input those as well. Finally, our pilot information, so name, email, address, phone, and license. Name, email, phone, and license number are all mandatory fields. And finally, at the very bottom there, we see our undercarriage information, specifically our Nav Canada section, specifying what type of undercarriage we have, who the arrival report will be filed with, and what ELT we have on board. Now, the arrival report, I know in this case, since I filed many flight plans in southwestern Ontario, I know that's going to go to, I'm going to call London FIC and file my arrival report. If you do not necessarily know who the arrival report should be filed with, you can always put in 1866 weather brief, because that'll connect you to the closest FSS where you can close or amend your flight plan or file your arrival report. When I'm all satisfied with that, I can again hit that send to button and either save my flight plan into documents. I can prepare it for printing, and you see that you get the standard ICAO flight plan form there. I can also send it to a third-party application to be opened and saved. And here I can view it as if I were writing it out on a sheet of paper and make sure everything's okay. Once I'm satisfied with that, I'm going to tap File. And it's going to ask me if I'm ready to file this flight plan departing in an hour and 36 minutes from now. When I tap File, it's going to say filing your flight plan, and your flight plan has been filed. Now, it's important to note that you do need an active internet connection when doing this. So preferably on a good Wi-Fi connection, or if your device has LTE or other cellular services, that'll work as well. Now, shortly after filing your flight plan, you'll notice that you'll probably get a ding on your cell phone or on your email. And what that is a filed email, an email confirming that you filed your flight plan and a summary of that flight plan, as well as some METAR and TAF information, and the ability to, or it will also include a link with the ability to download your briefing and print it if you want it. So it's on record there that you filed that flight plan, your routing, and your weather information. This is sent to the email that you've specified on that flight plan form, as well as the email associated with your ForeFlight account. Now, after filing your flight plan and 2 hours prior to scheduled departure time, ForeFlight will begin to monitor your route of flight and providing weather and other alerts relevant to your filed flight plan. So there's a couple requirements here. You must have an internet connection to receive these alerts, and sync must be enabled on your account. So what we notice here is under the left-hand column there, under the flight plan that we filed, Brampton to Muskoka, we see that there's been one new flight notification. And this tells us that there's something like a airport or runway closure, NOTAM, or an urgent PIREP or SIGMET, some kind of severe weather watches or warnings that are affected or that affect our filed route. So let's take a look at what this is in this case. We see that there's an airport runway restriction at Muskoka. And if we open that up in more detail, it's just that runway 0927 is closed, which is actually the gravel strip or a grass strip in Muskoka. You'll also notice at the bottom that there are only two options to cancel and amend your flight plan. Now, you may have seen more options, and that may have been because it was a US file flight plan. But in Canada, when filing an when filing a VFR flight plan, ATC assumes that you will depart as filed. So there is no opening of a VFR flight plan through ForeFlight in Canada. Even if you do not activate the flight plan and you decide not to fly, Nav Canada will assume you have departed at your estimated time of departure. So, when filing a VFR flight plan in Canada, ATC assumes that you have departed as filed. Nav Canada will activate that flight plan or flight itinerary when the estimated time of departure comes up, and use it as the actual time of departure. So what that means is if you do not decide to fly, but you do not call Nav Canada to cancel your flight plan, after ETA, they will assume that you are overdue and will initiate search and rescue activities to locate your airplane. Something that we don't really want to do, right? So if you do decide to cancel your flight after your estimated time of departure, you must contact Nav Canada via the phone to cancel your flight plan. You cannot cancel it in ForeFlight. Now, if it is before your estimated time of departure and you do want to file some changes, you do have an amend option there. And by tapping amend, you can change your time of departure and other details of your flight plan. And any amendments will be sent to Nav Canada. If you want to cancel your flight plan before your estimated time of departure, you can do that as well. There'll be a confirmation asking you if you, in fact, do want to cancel, and a notification that your flight plan has been canceled. It's important to note as well that all VFR flight plans are sent directly to Nav Canada in Canada and forwarded to the appropriate FSS or FIC so that they can process your flight plan. So those are VFR flight plans, and I hope I demonstrated how really quick and easy it is to get all that information into ForeFlight and out to Nav Canada in a really efficient way. Obviously, it'll take some practice. Once you start filing more and more flight plans, you'll get the hang of it. And before you know it, it'll take just a couple clicks before sending your information off to Nav Canada. Now, if you have any further questions, we'll be happy to answer those. Just hold on to them, and once we're near the end of the presentation, we'll have time for more questions. So now we take a look at IFR filing. Very similar with the VFR processes, with just a few differences. In today's example, we'll take a route from a little longer route from Toronto to Winnipeg in a slightly larger aircraft than a 172. So aircraft type today, we're going to select that from the aircraft list here. It'll be a Dash 8 going from Toronto to Winnipeg. The ForeFlight built-in performance profile we're going to select as a high-speed cruise at 24,000 feet. Now, since this is a longer route, we're going to cheat a little and we're going to take a look at our route advisor and see what kind of recommended and ATC cleared routes have been for this particular aircraft type and in recent history. So we're going to take a look at the recommended route for this one. If I'm anticipating a departure runway and an arrival runway in Winnipeg, I'm going to put those in. I'm going to adjust my departure time to make sure that's accurate. And I'm going to take a look at packing for the flight, because I know I probably don't have everything packed on my device. Up-to-date weather and airmets imagery if I wanted it. And we'll have that run in the background. Taking a look at your nav log as well. And this is what I find really useful, the ability to profile your flight and add layers like airspace, icing, and turbulence to see where exactly en route you can expect those things. Looks like 240 might be a little bit bumpy today. And when I'm satisfied with all that, I can hit the send to button and send that flight over to the flights page. We won't spend too much time looking at the navlog and briefings, as they're very similar to what we saw in the VFR flight plans. But we will talk about some differences in IFR filing. So you'll notice right off the bat that for IFR flights, you want to put in an alternate, and you want to make sure you're filing the IFR flight rules. Now, what ForeFlight does is actually have a very handy alternate advisor, just much like you saw with the route advisor. And it will actually give you a list of suggested alternate airports, along with what type of approaches they have available, how long, and the amount of fuel you're going to burn getting there. If it's towered or not towered, the longest runway available. So a really, really handy tool. Now, you might already have an alternate in mind. So if you type that airport code in, you can select that airport as well, based on operational regions or just past file flight plans as well. So in this case, I'm going to select Brandon as my alternate, as I know operationally that's where I'm going to want to go and the weather is good and sufficient. Scrolling down, my route advisor has already been used in the maps page. So now I'm just going to adjust my payload. 45 people with 500 pounds of cargo. Fuel policy, we're going to select the maximum fuel policy. So we're going to load it to the brink. Give me a nice fuel policy breakdown so I can always select alternate fuel policies if I wanted to. How much fuel I'm expecting to burn in flight, as well as my expected landing fuel with reserves and extra. So I'm happy with that. Take a look at my weight breakdown. See I'm below my ramp weight and zero fuel weights and takeoff weights. And take a look at my expected landing weight. This is all really like cheating. ForeFlight does everything for you. Looking at Winnipeg FBOs, I'm planning to go to AvFlight when I land, so I'm going to select their FBO there just to have it as a reference, a quick reference. I haven't packed for this flight fully yet, so there's some new weather and OTAMs, so I got to make sure my pack status is fully updated. Taking a look at the navlog, you'll see this is a bit of a longer navlog because it includes an alternate airport there. And it lists all the pertinent information for the flight. Again, I can print this off if I'd like to, or send it over to my email or someone else. we have that option to change into an international nav log, in which we have a lot more space to write in things like ATIS and clearances. At the bottom there, you'll see the ICAO flight plan form. That's going to be transmitted to air traffic control. Now we're going to take a look at the flight briefing. Again, not much different than what we saw with the VFR filings. This being a longer route, we're going to see a lot more waypoints. METARs and TAFs with destination, departure. And there we have it. I don't believe we saw METARs and TAFs for our alternate there. So in this case, I would just refresh the briefing on the flights page here to make sure that briefing had included the alternate, because that's something you'll want to have in your weather package. All right, so moving on. Once I'm all ready, I will tap the proceed to file. Again, we get the flight plan form here, flight rules IFR. All the appropriate aircraft information is correct. Scrolling down, my time of departure is all correct. My en route and routing looks good. Fuel on board, altitude, any STS special handling. This is where if you were a medevac aircraft, you could put in medevac there. Any remarks we want to put in our flight plan. You'll see that the destination fields now are optional as far as contact and phone. Since we're filing an IFR flight plan, that's not required by Nav Canada. You could put something in there, so it's optional, but it's not required. A dinghy and emergency equipment. And finally, what is required is pilot name and information. Once we're happy with that, we hit file, but ForeFlight has recognized that we have an error. And the error is on this surveillance other information here. When we put our ADS-B out capability and what type of ADS-B out capabilities we have, we made an error by putting a slash there. So ForeFlight runs a quick check on your flight plan form to make sure that there's no obvious errors, and it'll give you what that error is above here. So other information, sir, subfield invalid. It cannot contain any of those characters. So what we're going to do is just adjust that to make sure the flight plan goes through correctly. And we're going to do that right here. Perfect. So tapping next and confirming the filing, we are ready to go. We received that notification that the flight plan has been filed. After getting that notification and after filing, your flight plan is transmitted directly to the Air Traffic Control Center if your estimated time of departure is within 22 hours. You can file flight plans outside of the 22-hour window. However, they will not be transmitted to air traffic control until 22 hours before. If it's beyond 22 hours, what we do, ForeFlight actually holds the flight plan and then it's transmitted 22 hours before. Once the air traffic control computer acknowledges the receipt of that plan, you will get a notification saying, hey, your flight plan from Toronto, Winnipeg has been acknowledged by the air traffic control computer. You can cancel your flight plan before your estimated time of departure, and you'll get cancellation confirmations there as well. So let's take a look at some good to know information when you are filing IFR in Canada. If you do need to amend an IFR flight plan in Canada, in particular if it's your destination or your route, NavCanada highly recommends that canceling the existing plan and filing a new plan is the best option, and the new plan would include the new amendments. Now, depending how far out you make the amendments will work. However, just to clean up the process a little bit, NavCanada recommends that you refile. IFR flight plans can be amended or canceled or delayed up to 45 to 60 minutes before the proposed departure time, depending on where you are, and we'll get there in 1 second. Once you're inside what's called the filer lockout window, and the proposed departure time approaches, the flight information region will require you to manually coordinate with them to amend or cancel the flight plan. So if you're within that filer lockout window, the only way to actually amend or cancel the flight plan will be to call them directly with the appropriate FIR through either a frequency or a phone number. Now, before I mentioned, depending on where you are, this might change, and that's because the FIRs have different filer lockout times. For example, if your flight information region is in Edmonton, it's going to be a 60-minute lockout window where you can't amend or cancel that flight plan. But if you're in Moncton or Toronto, that's only 45 minutes. So depending on where you are, you may be able to get away with amending or canceling it through ForeFlight or a little earlier. When in doubt, always contact your FIR to make sure your flight plan has been canceled or amended. Another thing, when you're filing back-to-back IFR flight plans through ForeFlight, make sure to allow for at least 30 minutes on the ground between the flights. So for example, if your departure time for the second flight is 15 minutes after the arrival of your first flight plan, that won't be good with Nav Canada. So you'll have to make sure that there's at least 30 minutes after the arrival of your first flight plan. Otherwise, they'll treat the second flight plan as an overlapping flight plan, and you'll get a rejection. All right, simple as that. Moving now on to YFR and ZFR filing. I'll be the first to admit I haven't ever filed a Y or Z flight plan in Canada, but the ability has always existed. Just recently did it come to ForeFlight. So let's take a further look at it. Essentially, what we're doing is in a Y flight plan, we're transitioning from an IFR flight rules to VFR flight rules, and in a Z flight plan, we're transitioning from a VFR flight rules to IFR flight rules. There's a little bit more information on it in the AIM, the RAC section, Chapter 3, 15.2.1. So, customers flying in Canada can now file under these flight rules through ForeFlight. Since these flight rules include both a VFR portion, certain fields in the flight plan that are required for VFR flights in Canada are also required for Y and Z flights. Things like undercarriage, ELT, and arrival port. Let's take a look at building one of these Y flights in ForeFlight. So Y flights, just as a reminder, we're going from IFR to VFR. I'm going to start building my route on the maps page. And for today's flight, I'm going from Burlington, Ontario to North Bay for the first portion. So I'm going to build an IFR route, and we see that we're going up to the Midland VOR, taking a Victor Airway up to the North Bay VOR and the North Bay Airport. Now, a practical reason you would file one of these flights is if you're practicing IFR, for example, and you want to do an IFR portion and then a VFR portion, or the weather is insufficient for VFR flights up to North Bay today, but beyond that, it is VFR, so you might want to make the switch. What we're going to do is we're going to tap on North Bay. Since that's not my final destination, we're just building the route so far, but that's going to be my transition point into the VFR flight rules. So I'm going to scroll down and set an altitude and an airspeed, which is located just down that drop-down menu there, where it says set altitude and airspeed. And here's where we can make some changes on our flight. So if we are continuing the flight, let's say to Sudbury, we are going to change the altitude to a VFR altitude. And if we have any speed changes, for example, we can input the speed changes there as well, not necessary. And then you'll see at the very bottom there, you have a flight rules change. So we can indicate, okay, we're going to change to VFR on this portion. And then I'm going to put in my final destination, which is actually Sudbury today. So this is essentially a Y flight plan from Burlington, Ontario to Sudbury with a flight rules change at North Bay. We can see that in the route string there. We've indicated that at North Bay, we're going to be going down to 4,500 feet and continuing VFR to Sudbury. I included the speed there, but it's not absolutely necessary. And for today's portion as well, I can actually input, hey, you know what? I'm going to do an IFR approach in North Bay. But this change will only appear on the maps page. So when we go to file this flight plan, the fact that I'm doing an approach won't be indicated on the route string. Okay. But there is something we can do to indicate to ATC that, hey, we plan to do an approach in North Bay, for example. You can always get rid of the approach on the maps page here and then add it in later after we file the flight plan. That also works, and we can keep it in there. But for today's purposes, we're just going to get rid of that. And the system actually gets rid of it automatically once we send this to the flights page and for filing. So once we send that over to the flights page, you can see right there at the bottom, the route string, that approach is not indicated there. But what is indicated is that at North Bay, we're going to transition to VFR and our final destination is Sudbury. The routing, the flight rules change. You'll have to indicate that you're filing in a Y flight plan, so it's IFR to VFR. And when we proceed to file this one, we're going to make sure all the details are correct as well. In the remarks section on the flight form, here's where we can indicate that we're doing an approach in North Bay. So something that tells ATC, hey, this is what he intends to do in North Bay. And in reality, you'll be in contact with ATC the whole time since you're flying IFR. And they'll see on your flight that, okay, he's continuing on to Sudbury as a VFR flight plan after this. And they will close your IFR portion. Moving on, you'll want to input the destination as well as the search and rescue information, because it is ending as a VFR flight, so you'll want to have all that information in there. How this transitions to looking on an actual flight plan form, you'll see that we have the Y flight rules. We're going, our routing includes the fact that we are transitioning to a VFR flight rules. And in the remarks section, you'll see that we are planning one approach in North Bay. Once we file this flight plan, you'll receive an acknowledgement like we usually do. And since we have a VFR portion included in that flight today, we will have to close it when we arrive in Sudbury. So if at any point your flight plan includes a VFR portion, please make sure to call the appropriate FIC to close that flight plan. Now, if you're not sure what FIC that is, 1-866 Weather Brief will get you there. Along the same lines, Z flights are flights that transition from VFR flight rules to IFR flight rules. Here's an example of a Z flight, and I think probably one of the most applicable examples is if you are departing an airport in the mountains, VFR, and then want to pick up an IFR clearance in the air to your destination. You can file a Z flight plan that would transition you from a VFR flight, maybe a sightseeing flight, into an IFR flight rules to your final destination. So in this example, we have an airplane that's departing Kelowna. I'll be doing a sightseeing flight with a VFR route corridor all the way to Kamloops. And then over Kamloops, or just past Kamloops, starting at the Yankee Zulu Alpha VOR, we're going to transition to IFR to our final destination of Pitt Meadows. So what I've done here is, because there's no ability to actually put in VFR route corridors at the moment, I've just put in several lat longs of the kind of mimicking or mirroring the route that I intend to take. I have the Kamloops Airport in there as well. If I intend to do anything at Kamloops Airport, I would put in the remarks section of the flight plan. At the Yankee Zulu Alpha VOR, I'm transitioning to a flight level of 140, IFR flight rules, and then my routing to Pitt Meadows. Taking a closer look at what that looks like. So there is Kelowna. You can see that there's a VFR route corridor going past Salmon Arm there. Northbound, and then it goes into a southwestern trajectory. Right over Kamloops Airport, and then the Yankee Zulu Alpha VOR. Finally to Pitt Meadows. Taking a look at this, I know I'm not going to be able to do all this at one altitude, so transitioning to the profile view, I can see that at 7,500 feet further down the route, I am not going to be able to have sufficient terrain clearance. So what I can do is rubber band my altitude to see what altitude will work for the route of flight. Now, since there's a VFR portion and an IFR portion, we know there's going to be a altitude change. The profile view is giving me an error saying, hey, your altitude exceeds a ceiling of 12,000 feet, which in this case would make sense because that's a 172. So I would have to adjust my aircraft to conform to the altitude that I have to fly at. In this case, I know my 172 is not going to go up to flight level 140, right? So I would choose either a different aircraft or adjust my routing to stay clear of terrain. Once I'm all done with that, I would send this over to the flights page. Now, in a Z flight, considering that we're going from VFR to IFR and we're ending the flight with an IFR flight rules, I'm going to put in an alternate. And to be honest, as a general rule, if in doubt, always put in an alternate for Y and Z flight plans. I'm going to use the alternate advisor here in the flights page. It's going to give me a series of airports to choose from, or I can input my own airport code. But today, Victoria looks like a decent alternate. The weather is great. It has all the requirements of my airplane and several approaches. So I'm going to add Victoria, British Columbia to my alternate. You can take a look at some more information very conveniently in that info tab there, or my landing data based on my aircraft performance. Again, that would be at performance plus feature only. Scrolling further down, my flight rules, I want to make sure that it's set properly to Z, because we're going from VFR to IFR, and my route string will be listed there at the bottom. Now, proceeding to file, much of it's the same as what we've been doing so far. Something that'll change here is if you want to put a remark in on what exactly you're intending to do, because when these flight plans come across the ATC, they can seem a little complicated, but anything you can put in the remarks to help them out would be appreciated. So I'm just going to say, hey, following the VFR route corridor from Kelowna to Kamloops, and then they'll see the transition in altitude and flight rules on the flight plan form. In the destination there, you'll see, because again we have a VFR portion to this flight, we will be required to put in that search and rescue contact information and phone number. On the flight plan form itself, this is what it would look like. So we are filing Z. That's our route string. Our final destination is Pitt Meadows. And we have some remarks in there as well. Now, closing a VFR portion of the flight plan. Since we have that portion in there, we will have to close it somehow. In this case, since you're going to be picking up an IFR clearance, you can request with ATC to close your VFR flight plan portion and continue IFR, and they will be happy to do that. If for some reason you can't get a hold of them, as soon as you land IFR, make sure to close that VFR portion as well. All right, going into cross-border flying. So I know there's not too much of this going on at the moment, given the circumstance, but we know a lot of Canadian pilots and U.S. pilots cross the border all the time for flight plans and flights and sightseeing flights and all that. So we just want to reiterate that ForeFlight is a great tool to do that with. You can file both VFR and IFR flight plans across the border. One thing you can't do, though, is file those YZ flight plans that we just talked about. So YZ flying capabilities, if you are changing flight rules, you cannot do that if you're crossing the border. What ForeFlight also doesn't do is take care of EAPIS, any customs, both on either side of the US or Canada, or any of the additional requirements like the aircraft user decals, or basically anything you have to do on top of actually filing a flight plan. You'll have to do that outside ForeFlight at this time. So let's take a route. Today we're going from London, Ontario to Morristown, New Jersey. And it's a pretty simple route, VFR route. This is a VFR Canada to US flight plan. One thing you'll notice right off the bat is that I have two waypoints, both one in Canada and one in the United States. We highly recommend filing a waypoint or a nav aid along the border. Usually within 15 minutes of flight time within the border on either side is a good sufficient amount. This will guarantee that both, this case, Toronto and New York Center know what waypoints you're transitioning from on the border, and they'll have it in their system. So it's very easy for them to issue clearances and pick you up if they know where exactly you're crossing. In this case, I chose St. Catharines and Buffalo, both very recognizable waypoints that will be in both databases. Continuing on from VFR to Canada, VFR Canada to US. I'm going to send this over to my flights page. Now that we're on the flights page here, we can continue as though we were doing any other flight plan, making sure the flight rules are correct. Our routing is what we want it to be. Our altitude selection, doing a quick check on which altitudes work best. Fuel burns times, and average wind components. Continue on to the payload and fuel sections, updating your person's count if needed, or your cargo if needed, and the amount of fuel on board as well. That'll transition us to our weight and balance summary, taking a look at all those services and taking a look at all those weights and selecting any services that you expect to get at Morristown by the FBO link there. I'm going to make sure I'm packed for this flight to have all the necessary charts required for both Canada and US. Now you will need a Canadian and US subscription to have these charts. And while that's packing, what I'm going to say is that for any cross-border flying, you always have to be on a flight plan. You always have to be in touch with air traffic control, and you have to be squawking a code. So whatever type of VFR or IFR flights you're doing, you'll want to make sure that you're on all those three. Now, if you file a flight plan in Canada, that flight plan will be sent over to the US and vice versa. Moving on to the flight plan form, once you're all ready to fill that out, since this flight is originating VFR from Canada, you will have to fill out the search and rescue information as you would a normal VFR flight plan in Canada, so the contact and phone information, as well as all the pilot details and the Nav Canada subsection there at the bottom. Now, since this is a VFR US, since this is a VFR Canadian to US flight plan, VFR flight plans should be opened in the country of departure and closed at the destination country. So, Nav Canada assumes that your that your flight plan is open at your estimated time of departure, unless otherwise changed with them. Your flight plan in Canada will be activated automatically. Once you get to the US, to your destination, you will close that flight plan with the US flight service on 1-800-WX-BRIEF. So my arrival report is going to be 1-800-WX-BRIEF or through Tower if you happen to talk to Tower there. It's a little bit different on the way back, and we'll get to that in a bit. But again, VFR flight plans are activated automatically in Canada. Once you cross the border and land, you will be closing those flight plans with US air traffic control or flight service station 1-800-WX-BRIEF. Once we file that flight plan, we'll get the same VFR options there at the bottom that we do in Canada: cancel and amend. If we don't decide to fly here, we will have to call and past our estimated time of departure. You will have to call London Flight Service in this case, or 1-866-WX-BRIEF to close and cancel that flight plan. We got a couple notifications here, flight notifications on our route. There are several airmets and other pertinent information for our route of flight, so you can take a look at these. And once we arrive in Morristown, we're going to close our flight plan with US Flight Service. Now let's reverse that. So now we're going back. We're going from Morristown to London, Ontario. I'm going to have my routing very similar. We're going to be going basically direct Buffalo and then St. Catharines to London. I know London is my airport of entry where I can clear customs. I'm satisfied with that. I'm going to send it over to my flights page, and we'll talk about some differences here. On the flight planning form, you'll see that the destination, search and rescue, contact and phone number are now optional because you are essentially filing a US VFR flight plan. These are not mandatory fields. I still would recommend putting these in there because when it gets transferred to Nav Canada, they're going to want to see that in there, but it is listed as an optional field. All your pilot information has to be inputted there. And now here's a little bit of a difference. If you are going from the US to Canada on a VFR flight plan, US VFR flight plans are not automatically activated like they are in Canada. So you are given an activate option in ForeFlight. You will have to activate that flight plan before you are airborne in ForeFlight. It does require an internet connection, so make sure you do that before hopping in. And essentially what it does is ask you, hey, are you sure to activate your plan with flight services? And the departure will be whatever time you are activating it in, and it'll give you an estimated time of arrival. Once we're happy with that, we activate our flight plan, we go flying, we cross the border, closing the VFR flight plan in this case. If you're going from the US to Canada, you'll have to close it with Canadian Flight Services. So you're going to call W866 1866 WX brief when you land in Canada and you clear customs. Simple as that. As far as the IFR side of things go, it's very, very similar to just filing IFR within Canada. There are some things to note. So we're going to discuss filing IFR from the US to Canada at the moment. IFR flight plans can be filed up to 28 days in advance and will be transmitted to ATC 22 hours before the proposed departure time, much similar to what we talked about before. Any flight plan filed less than 22 hours will be sent to ATC immediately, and then you'll get that acknowledgement that ATC has, in fact, acknowledged your flight plan in the system. IFR flight plans, just like in the US, just like in Canada, can be amended or canceled up to 47 minutes before departure time. That's an average in most cases. In some centers, it's over an hour, like in New York, it's 61 minutes. So once again, just like in Canada, if you're inside that filer lockout window and the proposed departure time approaches, the center does require that you manually coordinate with them to amend or cancel the flight plan. You can do that directly with ATC on the radio or over the phone. If your new departure time is within 2 hours of your original departure time, so you got delayed a little bit, but you're still within that 2 hour window of when you were supposed to depart, it's pretty simple. Just ask for your clearance because ATC will have that in their system still. And as long as you're within that 2 hour time frame, they shouldn't have any problem giving you a clearance. If you're outside that 2 hour window, then we do recommend that you file a new flight plan because that 2 hour window will have expired and your flight plan will likely have expired. They won't have it on the system. These are the lockout windows, filer lockout windows for different centers and ARTCCs in the US. Just like in Canada, there's just a lot more of them, and their flight filer lockout windows do differ. If you're going from Canada to the US with an IFR flight plan, all this still applies. We hold the flight until 22 hours before, then we send it off to ATC. You'll receive a notification. The lockout windows do differ, so on average in the US it was about 47 minutes. In Canada it's between 45 and 60, depending on what FIR you're in. And this is one caveat that we recommend in Canada. When you need to amend your destination or route of flight, we do recommend that you just cancel and refile instead of trying to amend the flight plan. It just makes things a lot cleaner on the NavCanada portion of NavCanada side of things. And that's what we've been recommended that we do. The FIRs, again, listed filer lockout windows. If you want to make any amendments within that window, we suggest calling in them directly. And that's pretty much it. Hopefully, I've demonstrated a relatively simple process. I'm sure there's some questions we'll be happy to answer. If you do have any questions, please email team@foreflight.com. If it's something very urgent, just say, hey, we need a phone call, and we'll be happy to get in touch with you as soon as we can. Always remember that we are all pilots here on the pilot support team, so you have real people, real pilots ready to help you out. Some very useful resources for all Canadian pilots is the ForeFlight's Guide to Pilot's Guide and filing ICAO with ForeFlight guide, which is available both online and in the ForeFlight application under the catalog. Actually, that should be changed now to drives. So that's an error on my end, but it's going to be under Documents, Drives, and ForeFlight. And our website, www.foreflight.com/support, is always riveted with great information. A nice quick reference guide, especially when it comes to those PBN codes. The ICAO filing with ForeFlight quick reference guide, it'll give you a great guide to picking and choosing the appropriate PBN codes and ICAO surveillance codes for your aircraft. And as always, team@foreflight.com if you can't find any of those. I'd like to thank you very much for your patience and for your attention. We hope you've learned something from this webinar, and we'll be happy to answer some questions.
All right, so first question up is, can you add an IFR flow number to an IFR flight plan when filing in ForeFlight? Dominik, can you provide the answer to that?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, the IFR flow numbers are transmitted within the ATC computers themselves, so you don't really need to include it. ATC will have your flow number, and you don't really need to tell them you have an IFR flow number either. But if you want to add that on your flight plan form, then you can just add it in the remarks section, and then that's where you would put an IFR flow number. But again, especially nowadays, if you have a flow number assigned, ATC will know just by your registration what your flow number is. So.
Great. Next up, is the G code for GPS for handhelds as well as IFR rated units?
Yeah, so the use of G only should be indicated if it's for IFR certified GPSs, so not handhelds.
So then related to that, would you put B or G or both if you have an IFD 440, which is WAAS capable?
Yeah, so specifying Bravo does not assume Golf, so you have to actually put both of those in there. You have both a Bravo and a Golf codes. Yeah.
All right, next up. In Canada, we are required to enter an alternate on an IFR flight plan. ForeFlight does not warn me if I forget to enter an alternate. What do you have to say in response to that?
Yeah, there is no warning that comes up specifically saying that you do not have an alternate filed. It's likely NavCanada might reject that flight plan because of that, but that's up to the pilot's responsibility to make sure an alternate is filed. You can always amend your flight plan in that case to include an alternate before your estimated time of departure, but yeah, you won't get a warning itself saying that you don't have an alternate filed.
All right, next up. We had a number of questions related to when you should file. If, for example, you fly to an airport and you're only there for 30 minutes before flying back, should that be filed as two separate flight plans? Or can you just indicate in the single flight plan that there's a 30-minute stopover and then you only have to file one? Which strategy would you advise for that kind of situation?
Yeah, so generally we recommend that if you are making a full stop at during a round trip, that we file two separate flight plans. If you're just planning to do touch and goes in Muskoka in this case, and you're planning to do them for 30 minutes, then without doing a full stop, we would just recommend putting in the remark section that, and NavCanada will add that to your total en route time, so that search and rescue is pushed back as well.
All right, next up, can you select a user waypoint as a departure or destination airport, i.e. a non-registered aerodrome?
Yeah, I don't know. Tim, do you want to answer this one? How to do that on the maps page there? If Tim's around.
He might not be, but
It's all good.
I think the answer is that you just have to send it from the maps view to the flights view, right? So if you have a user waypoint in your route on the maps view, you just have the send to button, select flights, and it'll load that user waypoint into the flights view as the equivalent lat long, and then you can file that. And I believe when you do use one of those as a departure destination point, you can fill out there's in the filing form, there's a field that says something like departure name or something like that. So if,
Yeah.
for example, you're going to be,
exactly.
if you're going to be landing on a lake or something that you're just going to mark with a lat long, you can put the actual name of the lake in that name field so that ATC can recognize the actual location.
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, you're going to start with the flight plan. The maps page. It'll convert that that place that you're departing to a lat long, and then in the actual filing form, there is a departure section and a place name, which is optional, and you can put a place name there for ATC.
Right. So if you're filing from an actual registered airport, then there's no reason to fill out that field.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. Next up, is there a way to close the VFR flight plan via ForeFlight instead of calling?
So not at this time, not in Canada. You will have to just call flight service upon landing, or some towers will also close your VFR flight plans if they're not busy.
All right. So some airports have VFR terminal procedure charts. However, I don't see an easy way to pull this page up. Typically, it's the page before the airport information page in the CFS, but touching the airport and clicking on the CFS entry doesn't give me access to the procedures page. Is there an easy way to find the VFR procedures page?
Yep. So we've actually included this VFR. So any airport in Canada that has a VFR terminal procedure chart, you can find that under the airports page. And if you click on procedure and other, any VFR terminal procedure charts listed there will be, any VFR procedure terminal charts that are applicable to the airport will be listed there. If you do need more information, or if there's some pages that describe the VFR terminal procedure that are not included there, then you'll have to go to the full CFS in the documents page.
Thanks. Next up, if I have a VFR flight, and they're talking about a round robin flight here, and I want to do touch and goes at the destination airport, how would I configure that in my route and in my flight plan?
Yeah, so it's kind of similar to what we talked about in that round trip flight planning. Is if you do intend to do touch and goes, or if you do intend to stay at an airport for a longer period of time, just remember to add that in the remarks section, and it'll be transmitted to ATC.
Right, and in that case, since they're not making a full stop at the airport, they don't need to file it as two separate flight plans. They can just file it as one, but mention in the remarks that they'll be doing touch and goes.
That's right, yep.
Cool, okay, next up here, if we activate our flight plan through ForeFlight in the US, will we get a confirmation that the flight plan is activated, such as by email?
You will not, but we don't send email confirmations per se, but the flight will display as an active flight plan in ForeFlight on the flight plan page. So that's how you know.
Mm-hmm. We've received a number of questions regarding receiving a departure squawk code or a transponder code when filing in ForeFlight. Is that something that we support?
So not at this time, but we know that the capability does exist, especially if you file directly through Nav Canada. They will issue you a SQA code. It's not something available in ForeFlight just yet, but definitely something we're interested in and put on our list for future development for sure.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question I can answer. Can I import and use my Jeppesen subscription on ForeFlight? The answer is yes. If you have an existing Jeppesen subscription, you can just go to, you can tap More and then Jeppesen. And all you have to do there is enter your Jeppesen username and your account password for your Jeppesen account. And that will then sign you into your account in ForeFlight. And from there, you can select the particular coverages you want to install. Now, that is only going to work if you have purchased digital chart coverages for Jeppesen. So if you only have chart coverages for your panel and not anything that you could view in Jeppesen mobile flight deck or any of those apps, then it's not going to work. So you need to have a Jeppesen chart coverage that includes at least one license for those digital chart coverages. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope this has been a really informative and helpful webinar. Thank you so much, Dominik, for putting so much time and effort into pulling this together. I think it went really well. And if any of you did not get your question answered, or if you feel like our answer wasn't quite good enough, then you can always email team@foreflight.com, and we will be more than happy to make sure you are fully satisfied with the answer that you get. Well, not always, but we'll do our best. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you on the next webinar.